Have you ever really looked at a slice of bread or a simple bowl of rice? Really thought about where it came from? Not the grocery store, but the thousands and thousands of human history that made it possible. We're talking about the agricultural revolution, the single biggest turning point for our species, and it all started with these two, simple grains.
So let's dive right in. How did these two humble grains build our entire world? Because the answer? Well, it's not just about food. It's about technology, it's about society, and it's about the very foundation of civilization as we know it. We're going to unpack how mastering wheat and rice didn't just fill our stomachs, it completely reshaped our planet. So here's how we're going to break it all down. First, we'll look at the two grains that basically define the East and the West. Then we'll trace their separate origins. After that, we'll get into the game-changing tech that made it all possible, see how it made our population just explode, and finally, connect all the dots to the rise of the first great civilizations.
All right, first up, two grains, one revolution. This is the big idea right here. The agricultural revolution wasn't just one single event. It actually happened in parallel, creating two huge, distinct cultural spheres, each built on a totally different staple crop.
And here's the key distinction. Over in the West, the Middle East, Europe, society was built on wheat. This led to what we can call a bread civilization. But at the same time, over in the East, entire societies were flourishing around the cultivation of rice, creating a rice civilization. And these weren't just menu options, they were the economic and cultural engines for half the planet.
So, how did it all get started? Let's rewind the clock, way back. We're going to explore the two separate birthplaces of agriculture, the places where our ancestors first made that incredible leap from just gathering wild plants to actively farming them. And this just lays it out so clearly. You can see these two parallel paths. Wheat farming kicks off about 12,500 years ago in the Fertile Crescent, that area that stretches across the modern-day Middle East. And at almost the exact same time, literally halfway across the world, people in China's Yangtze River Valley started cultivating wild rice. And get this, scientists now think that plant has a mind-boggling 100,000-year evolutionary history in that region alone.
What's really wild when you look at this timeline is just how long this all took. This was not some overnight eureka moment. For wheat, people were collecting it in the wild for over 10,000 years before they really figured out how to domesticate it. And for rice, that process from just trying to cultivate it to having it fully domesticated took thousands of years, finally coming together in what archaeologists call the Shangshan culture.
Okay, so you've got the plants, but how do you go from farming a tiny plot of land to farming fields that can feed a whole society? Well, that brings us to the incredible technological evolution that was needed. This is where human ingenuity really takes off and powers the entire revolution.
And you can see the progress here, like climbing a ladder of innovation. It started with polished stone tools, axes to clear the land, hoes to break up the soil, and sickles to harvest the grain. Then comes bronze, which is a big step up. It's sharper, it's more durable. But the real game changer was iron. An iron plow pulled by animals could turn over heavy, rich soil that was impossible to work by hand. This just revolutionized productivity.
Of course, solving the food problem also meant you had to solve the water problem. It was a global challenge, and different cultures came up with these absolutely brilliant solutions. In Mesopotamia, they dug massive canals to redirect the Tigris and Euphrates rivers. In Egypt, they perfected a system to use the Nile's predictable annual floods. And in China, well, they built incredible feats of engineering, like the Dujiangyan system, a sophisticated project that could automatically manage water flow. It just proves that mastering nature was the key.
So we've got the crops, and we've got the technology. But what did all of that actually do to us, to humanity? Well, the consequences were profound. Having a reliable food source didn't just change our diet, it completely rewired human society itself.
Let's put this into perspective. Before farming, the world was a really empty place. For millennia, the entire population of the planet hovered somewhere between just 5 and 10 million people. That's it, just small, scattered bands of hunter-gatherers.
And then this happened. Once agriculture took hold, the population just exploded. By 1000 BCE, there were around 150 million people on Earth. That's a potential 150-fold increase. It is the single greatest demographic shift in all of human history, and it was all powered by grain.
So how did this happen so fast? This chart tells the story pretty clearly. Genetic studies show that early farming communities grew at a rate 5 times faster than their hunter-gatherer neighbors. It just makes sense, right? A stable food supply and a settled lifestyle meant more children could survive and thrive.
This population boom fundamentally changed our social fabric. Hunter-gatherer groups were generally small, mobile, and pretty egalitarian. Sharing was a survival strategy. But agriculture flipped the script. People settled down in big villages. Land became the most important resource, and owning it created wealth and with it power. For the very first time, we start to see social hierarchies emerge: landowners, laborers, rulers, and the ruled.
This new, complex society needed new ways to organize itself, which leads us to our final crucial step: how the surplus of grain led directly to the complex systems we call civilization. This is where all the different threads come together.
Now this is one of my favorite parts of the story. Think about why writing was invented. We tend to think it was for poetry or history or epic myths, but the reality is much more practical. Over 90% of the earliest written texts we have are just economic records. Their receipts for grain, their land sales, their tax documents. Civilization, it turns out, was born from bureaucracy.
You can just see the chain reaction right here. That surplus of food meant that for the first time in history, not everyone had to be a farmer. This led to specialization. People could become artisans or priests or soldiers or rulers. These specialized people all gathered in dense population centers, which grew into the first cities. And to manage these cities, you needed complex institutions, governments, laws, and organized religion. These are the building blocks of civilization, all resting on a foundation of grain.
So in the end, the agricultural revolution was the engine that created the modern world. It was a technological and social shift that completely redefined what it even means to be human. And it really makes you wonder, what's the next revolution on that scale? What innovation is happening today that will completely reshape the world for our descendants, just as wheat and rice did for ours?